because it involved some at least more than 700 of the 2,500 readings. He referred to a wide pattern going back hundreds of thousands of years in Atlantean history, coming up to a period that corresponds to Plato's destruction of Atlantis, about 9,500 BC or 10,000, somewhere in there. He referred to the records that were buried in the Mayan country and in Egypt, and are still in the Caribbean area, according to him. And he indicated that these will eventually be found. Now, this is another, whole story. And if this is actually possible and does come about, then we will have a worldview of prehistoric experiences that is utterly fantastic and quite different from the known historical periods.
Did he ever read Plato or Donnelly?
No, he'd never seen Donnelly. I got a hold of Donnelly. I studied Plato in college, but my father had no knowledge of any of this material. He'd never read any of the theosophical material. He was not a person who read a great deal. He just didn't have the kind of books around him that could possibly have influenced. If he got it from other people's writings and other people's thought, he did it telepathically, he did it clairvoyantly, he was picking it up from the scrambled picture. But out of that scrambled picture, which is if you know the Atlantean legends and stories, they'd scrambled all right. If he was getting it that way, he reconstructed it in the most amazing, beautiful, detailed pattern of prehistorical data that he says there's evidence for that can be found. And we've got to check that out, like anything else he said.
Casey, of course, isn't alone in having received psychic information about Atlantis. Perhaps the reason his readings have caused such a stir is that they've only recently been dramatically corroborated. We'll come back to that in a minute or two. But long before Casey's crucial contribution in the 1920s, Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, and Rudolf Steiner, father of the Anthroposophical Society, had been writing of their visions of Atlantis. And in their wake have followed a score of imaginative theories. Here's James Willard, a journalist and author of The Search for Lost Worlds, with a lighter sample of what he's come across.
They start with the myth of Atlantis, which is a universal myth, because you have it in the Genesis, the flood, yes, and the ark. See, that's the same story, really. Mm-hmm. You have it in Greek mythology.
Deucalion.
Yes, Deucalion. You have it in the Indian epics. You have it to some extent in the Icelandic sagas. Yeah. Hence, the whole myth seems to me to have a basis somewhere in history. Well, the people, the Atlanteans as they're generally called, those who are interested in this subject, and there are a lot of people still interested in it, start with the basic Platonic account. And
then they change the location of
the location changes, yes.
And they say that it was rather in the Pacific Ocean.
Yes, Pacific, Central America,
or Southern America.
Yes.
Or Africa.
Yeah, Africa, Sahara.
Or
even in Japan. Northern Europe.
Or in Russia.
Sweden. It pops up all over the place.
So actually, the Atlantis of these people could be anywhere.
Mm.
And could be any time.
Right, yes. To me, frankly, they're just a little bit eccentric, if not a little bit mad, but it's a nice sort of madness. I give a description from one of them of what these people, these Lemurians, look like. And really, it does make you laugh. I don't like laughing at these people or scoffing at them. I don't think that's fair. But this is so ridiculous, really. They say that the Lemurian, that is the man who lived on Lemuria, or Mu, because it doesn't matter, they're more or less the same, was 9 feet tall. He had an eye in the front and an eye at the back, and he could walk forwards or backwards because his feet were shaped the same way. He had sort of toes, I suppose, on each side of his foot.
Like a T, like a letter T reversed.
Yes. They also were able to communicate by thought, which is, they never had to talk because they could communicate, and they could also copulate in the same way by thinking of this, and reproduce each other.
Telesex?
Yes. Yeah, that's a new one, but so it goes on, and it
What else?
It gets sort of madder and madder. Now, where is the evidence for these 9 feet tall people who could walk forwards and backwards because their
9
feet?
feet tall people are possible, I think. But
Well,
it's not
yes.
possible is to have an eye in the back and in the front,
This idea.
or have a third eye, and I don't think that...
No, wait a minute. Can I give you the exact quotation? This is a Lemurian man. It's really worth hearing. His stature was gigantic, somewhere between 12 and 15 feet. He had a long lower jaw, a strangely flattened face, eyes small but piercing and set curiously far apart so that he could see sidewise as well as in front, while the eye at the back of his head, on which part of the head no hair of course grew, enabled him to see in that direction also. In his right hand was twisted the end of a long rope, made of some sort of creeping plant, by which he held a huge and hideous reptile, somewhat resembling the plesiosaurus. The Lemurians actually domesticated these creatures and trained them to employ their strength in hunting other animals. And so it goes on, and what is he really talking about here, do you suppose? It is, as you say, it's a bit like a novelist, you see, would imagine a character. But they did not regard themselves as fiction writers. I think they would have hit us over the head if we'd have suggested that.
If Edgar Casey's readings on Atlantis are fiction, they are at least uncannily precise. Here's Casey's son, Hugh Lynn, again, talking with Robert Zend.
Now, you said that he agreed with Plato, whom he never read, regarding the time of Atlantis. What was his idea about the location of Atlantis?
He said that the Atlantis existed as an enormous continent in the Atlantic Ocean at one time. That there was a breaking up of this great continent, and it was divided up, volcanic eruptions and so forth, into islands, large islands. And then there was another violent eruption that was brought on by the Atlanteans themselves, misusing the power which they had developed, which is utterly fantastic, that they developed tremendous power sources and control of atomic, or he called them, use of the sun's rays through crystals. And these powerful devices actually helped set off the volcanic eruptions. And so there was only then left only one island called Posidia, and that it was in the area of what is now the Sargasso Sea. And that prior to the final destruction, the people began to move before the second destruction, that there were colonies established in northern Africa, from which I think Robert Graves has traced some legends of Atlantis. There were colonies established in the Pyrenees, there were colonies established in Egypt, there were colonies in the Mayan country, etc. And then the whole thing was wiped out and sank. And that it's been down for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, not a few years, but a great deal of time there. He would suggest that there were two great continental areas at one time. The Lemurian continent in the Pacific and the Atlantean continent, and it was the breakup of these two great continents that destroyed the massive population that existed then, and that we're just beginning to build back to the number of bodies that are available for souls to enter the earth, and that we're not near the saturation point that existed prior to the Atlantean and the Lemurian destructions. Now, in 1923, when the first life readings were given, he began to refer to incarnations of people in Atlantis. when he actually did go to Florida and give readings on the area of Bimini, used geological descriptions of Bimini long before